Hey everyone, it's Ben Hardy here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about something that is currently propping up new car prices, and this something could continue into the next few years. Before we get into this video though, as always, if you want to save time and money, the next time you purchase a car, link to my car buying guide in the description down below. And then if you want to see more videos just like this, then I recommend you subscribe because I post content every single day. Let's get into it. So Cox Automotive has this report from January that details how crazy the fleet market has gotten. And once they release the February report, we will go over it. But I think the January report is very important because this is telling of what we are going to experience moving forward through the 2023 sales year. So this January was an especially strong January. We've talked about this on the channel. Typically what you'll see in a January compared to December is that sales will decline by 25 to 30% month over month. Whereas this January, we saw a sales decline of less than 20%. So that means that January was especially strong. And most of this, volume actually came from fleet sales. That's where most of the strength came from, because if we look at light vehicle sales, they increased by 4.2% from January of 2022 to January of 2023. And only 0.3% of that increase was from regular retail customers. So most of that 4.2% increase was because of the increase in fleet sales. And here's the numbers. So overall fleet sales, taking into account every single category, increased by 58% year over year. So January of 2022 compared to January of 2023. Now, if we break this down, rental fleets increased by 96% year over year, commercial fleets 31%, and government fleet sales 65%. And so every single sector of fleet, especially those rental fleet companies, they purchased way more cars January this year compared to last year. And so again, that is bolstering the overall amount of new cars sold in the market. Now, in terms of the overall market share that these fleet sales are consuming with light-duty vehicles, it's 16.5% as of January. And if you're wondering how that compares to January of 2022, that month saw only 13.2% of light-duty vehicles being sold to fleets. December was 14.2%, December of 2022. So you can see that we have this trend where fleet sales are increasing as time goes on. And then the next part of this report is actually pricing. So average price declined by 0.8% from December to January. So December 2022 to January of 2023. However, prices across the board were up by 5.8% from January of 2022 to January of 2023. So we saw a month over month decline, but we saw a year over year increase with pricing. Average MSRP from December to January fell by 0.9%, but from year over year, you're looking at a 7.3% increase. So transaction prices didn't increase as much as actual MSRP prices. And a big part of this is because of incentives. The average incentive spend in January was $1,386 as stated in this report, which is actually up by a decent amount. Now, historically, that is down by a large margin. I mean, prior to the pandemic, it was pretty common to see the average incentive spend in the $4,000 to $5,000 range. And so, although vehicles are moving, new vehicles at least are moving in the trajectory where there is, more incentives on them, and a big part of that is probably because of these fleet sales, potentially, we'll talk about that in a little bit. At the same time, we're still nowhere near where we were historically with these incentives. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about before we dive into what this means for the car market is the fact that this report could be lighter than what is actually happening. And what I mean is there are two different types of fleet sales. There is regular fleet sales, and then there is something called fleetail, which is a combination of fleet and retail. And what I mean is if a company wants a purchase to be considered as a fleet sale with a manufacturer, typically they have to have a fleet number with that manufacturer. And the reason why they have this fleet number is so that the manufacturer knows that, again, this is a fleet sale, but also so they can have set pricing on all the vehicles. Because when a company is going to be purchasing a large number of vehicles, then typically they'll get some sort of bundle deal, and that's what that fleet number will give through the manufacturer. And again, different companies have different fleet numbers because different companies have different deals with different manufacturers. And so something I just want to mention with this report is I don't know if this report only contains fleet and does not contain fleetail deals as well. My guess is that that is reality. And if that is reality, then there are a lot of deals that I would consider fleet deals that are not going to be counted on this report. Fleetail, if you're wondering, is when a person basically goes into a dealership and purchases a bunch of vehicles like what a fleet company would do, but they're not using a fleet number, right? They're just doing it through the normal dealership thing, and so that's why it's called Fleetail. And here in Utah, there's actually several dealerships that regularly do this, where they will basically order out a bunch of like work style trucks, for example, and they'll sell a bunch of these to like large companies. But again, they're not selling them through the normal like fleet number type deal. They're selling them as normal retail pieces, if that makes sense. So let's talk about what this actually means for the car market. And well, it's good news for automakers and bad news for the average Joe. The reason this is good news for automakers is this is actually going to give them a lot of pricing power, because again, these fleet companies are buying up their product. And so automakers can focus the extra production they have right now on building cars for these fleet companies instead of building cars for retail customers, which means that the inventory buildup that we have seen over the last few months is probably going to slow down quite substantially, which means that automakers won't have to incentivize their product nearly as much. And again, this is something that I can say I feel like I'm seeing anecdotally, because, you know, over the course of the end of last year, I saw this huge buildup of inventory at dealerships. And then it seems like as soon as the year turned over, it just stopped. Like, it seems like dealers, you know, they're still getting cars, but not nearly as many. And so again, I feel like resources with automakers are being allocated towards building these fleet type vehicles, because those are the customers that are buying. Retail customers are still buying, but you know, that market is a lot softer compared to the fleet market. Now, in terms of how long this is going to last for, it's too soon to tell. However, if I were a betting man, I would bet that this is going to last for, well, probably at least 2.5 years. And the reason I say 2.5 years is because fleet companies are massively behind with replacing their fleets. What you have to remember is that fleet companies pretty much got kicked out of the car market like at the start of the pandemic, because automakers pulled back with production a massive amount. Car prices went through the roof. And so a lot of these, you know, fleets just basically sat there for 2.5 years. And when I say sat there, the vehicles were obviously still used. So wear and tear was put on vehicles, you know, were put out of commission, all that kind of stuff. And they weren't necessarily able to replace them because of vehicle cost and vehicle availability. And so we basically have like 2+ years of pent up demand for these fleets. And so yeah, that's why I say I don't see this stopping anytime soon. And so this has potential, especially with how much market share fleet companies are currently taking. Again, 16.5%. And like I said, I don't think that number includes fleetail sales. I bet if it included fleetail sales, it would be probably at least 1/4 of the new car market with light duty vehicles. That's just my guess, right? I could be off. I don't have any like reason for that number. That's just where I would think it would sit. And so since this is such a large portion of the light duty car market, it means that like it's going to affect things quite a bit. And so I see this keeping car prices, MSRPs, not only elevated for the next few years, but I also see it keeping incentive spend lower for the next few years. And then once demand is finally met with these fleet companies, you know, we might see more of a quote unquote normal car market. But again, it's too soon to tell. So I'll just keep digging through the data and I'll give you guys updates as things go on. But I guess we're Bad News Ben today. I'll see you.